if you look at the comparison between Ukraine's success in intercepting drones and missiles with, or sorry, the ballistic missiles specifically, compare that with Israel's success, it's night and day. So the Ukrainians average about a 16% intercept rate on ballistic missiles. The Israeli intercept rate on Saturday was over 90%. So while the Iranians were learning this lesson from the Russians in Ukraine, they probably calculated that, yes, the Israeli air defenses are going to be more successful than Ukraine's, but I doubt that they expected that Israel's air defense structure would be just as effective as it actually ended up being. Again,
I mean, where to begin, really? I suppose, first of all, if you could just give me your assessment of what we've seen over the last few days.
yeah, sure. So obviously, on Saturday, April 13th, Iran launched hundreds of drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles targeting Israel. Several ballistic missiles impacted near a few Israeli military bases. So the Iranians were not targeting civilian sites, but rather military targets.
How well did the Iron Dome, the much vaunted Iron Dome of Israel, cope?
Well, it's hard to tell exactly how well the Iron Dome coped, but I think it's important to note that the Israeli air defenses are more than just the Iron Dome, especially in this case. And, just to draw us out a little bit, of course, a lot of the systems, particularly the drones, that the Iranians used are also used by Russia in its war in Ukraine. And so what we saw was some of the advantages that the Israelis have compared to the Ukrainians, which I don't think the Iranians fully accounted for. So in the first instance, you have the Israeli Arrow system, which is a anti-ballistic missile system that they use to shoot down some of the ballistic missiles. But also, Israel's allies in the region were able to help intercept drones and missiles over the rest of the Middle East before they even got close to Israel's borders, using fighter aircraft and other capabilities. And of course, this is not an advantage that Ukraine has. It doesn't have the fighter aircraft capable of carrying out this mission right now, nor does it have the geographic buffer that the rest of the Middle East gives to Israel.
And that's a really good point about the way that Israel's allies also played a key role here. I mean, had it not been for the US and indeed Jordan and the UK and others helping to shoot down some of these drones and missiles, would we be talking about a very different situation? Would the damage have been far worse?
It's certainly hard to tell, but I think it's important to kind of point out what the Allies actually did in this case. So, in the case of Jordan, there are reports that Jordanian aircraft shot down dozens of Iranian munitions over Jordanian airspace. Of course, the United States did the same with its suite of air defense systems in the Middle East, and there are reports that the British, as well as the French, also assisted in the air defense of Israel.
And just to go back to that comparison with what we're seeing in Ukraine and with Russia, the specific tactics were quite similar as well, weren't they, in terms of trying to overwhelm the air defenses?
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And I think part of why that is because the Iranians are looking at the Russian use of the Shahed drone, for example, as well as the Russian ballistic and cruise missiles against Ukraine and drawing lessons from that. So if you look at the structure of this strike package, the composition, the number of drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles, as well as how they were timed to enter Israeli airspace, there are a lot of similarities with how the Russians conduct these attacks in Ukraine. So of course, there are hundreds of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones that were launched in this attack, but they were launched in waves. So they were timed so that as the drones and cruise missiles began to enter Israeli airspace, they would distract the Israeli air defenses and the ballistic missiles would actually get through. So as you're looking at this strike package, the ballistic missiles are the component that Iran believed would strike home. And this is really important because that's how Russia structures a lot of its strike packages as well. But if you look at the comparison between Ukraine's success in intercepting drones and missiles the ballistic missiles specifically, compare that with Israel's success, it's night and day. So the Ukrainians average about a 16% intercept rate on ballistic missiles. The Israeli intercept rate on Saturday was over 90%. So while the Iranians were learning this lesson from the Russians in Ukraine, they probably calculated that, yes, the Israeli air defenses are going to be more successful than Ukraine's, but I doubt that they expected that Israel's air defense structure would be just as effective as it actually ended up being. Again, this goes home and really drives home the point about Ukraine and some of the systems that of course the Ukrainians need in their fight.
Surely, also one of the other key differences is that Israel was pretty much as prepared for this attack as you can be through intelligence briefings, through some pretty overt warnings from Iran.
Sure, although I don't think that the warnings are necessarily as important as they're being drawn out to be, in fact. I say that because there are a couple things on the Israeli side for context that need to be kept in mind. The first, Israel is already on a war footing. It's taking rocket fire, drone fire across its borders nearly every day. Its air defenses are already on high alert. Iran's warnings aren't really going to change that. Of course, it takes Israel faces ballistic missile and cruise missile fire from the Houthis as well on a pretty regular basis. Now, I think in terms of the Iranian telegraphing, it tried to create a tactical surprise by injecting uncertainty on when the strike would actually occur. But the Israelis were prepared. The Israelis knew that there would probably be some strike coming, given that they killed such a high level IRGC commander on April 1st. But also, like I said, they're on a war footing. And so I don't think the telegraphing of this attack, the warning of this attack, is actually as important to its success, to the air defense success, as some are putting out.
You mentioned the original Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Let's just rewind to there. What do you think Israel's motivation was with that strike?
Sure. So the commander that they killed was a very high level IRGC officer. He led the IRGC effort across Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. And he was actually one of the only non Lebanese members of the Lebanese Hezbollah Shura Council and its Jihad Council, which is really important. It shows the level, this shows the role that that individual played in Lebanese Hezbollah. Now, of course, I think one of the important items for us to keep in mind is how Iran is using using Syria rather to bring in weapons in other systems to Lebanese Hezbollah. Israel has been hitting these shipments as they come through Syria for months now, and of course, the strike on April 1st was part of this effort as well to degrade Iran's ability to support its partner in Lebanon, Lebanese Hezbollah.
Just on that, I was speaking on Frontline only last week to Roger Boyes, who's the Times diplomatic editor, and he made a very good point, which is that, of course, Russia essentially controls Syrian airspace. So why would it allow Israel to carry out this attack?
I'm not sure. It depends on what exactly which capabilities the Israelis used. In this case, I would be very surprised if the Israelis did not use the F-35, which is of course a stealth aircraft. In that case, there's a very good chance that Syria and Russia were not even necessarily aware that there were Israeli aircraft in the sky until the bombs were already falling.
And talk me through what their options for retaliation are. I mean, clearly one of them is to do nothing, and that's what many in the West are urging them to do. But if they do decide to retaliate, what are their options?
Sure. So I think there's three big options that the Israelis are probably looking at. Number one, no response. That's kind of your easy way out, for lack of a better term, when you're thinking about the U.S. alliance with Israel. The second is a significant strike targeting Iranian proxies in the region, Hezbollah, groups in Syria, groups in Iraq, groups in obviously the Houthis in Yemen. And then the third option is a attack within Iran itself. This is the most challenging for logistical reasons. It is also the most politically challenging with the U.S.-Israel alliance and Israel's relationship with the West at large. But I think that of those three, the latter two seem to be more likely right now, given what we're seeing come out in the form of leaks and indeed Israeli statements.
And if Israel do pursue one of those latter two options, would it then be inevitable that Iran would respond again in turn?
It's hard to tell. I think we'd have to wait to see how the Iranians respond and what their rhetoric by their senior leaders actually points to. Because, of course, to your earlier point, Iran's senior leaders in the wake of the April 1 attack had two big information lines. The first was, we will retaliate against Israel. The second was, United States, you need to stay out of our attack against Israel.